Hi everyone, Daniel here for Design Break, and today I'll be giving you an agency owner's perspective on Webflow versus Elementor. So I've made a similar video to this in the past, but I thought I would update it because Elementor's had some updates, Webflow's had some updates, and things have changed. So here we are, let's jump into it. Okay, so I'm going to run through a bunch of different categories. I'll talk about the price, the hosting experience, the design experience, the speed of the different platforms, security, and pitfalls between Elementor and Webflow. So starting out with the price, it's hard to compare these directly because there are so many different hosting providers that you can choose if you're building a WordPress and Elementor setup. Whereas with Webflow, you really just have to choose from their predetermined options. What I will say on this front is that the good WordPress hosting to host WordPress and Elementor will cost about the same as what Webflow charge. So if you want your site to be really fast, we're talking about like 95 page speed score, that kind of level, then the hosting is going to cost the same on WordPress as it will with Webflow, and especially once you roll in that Elementor Pro license cost as well. So I would say on this front, the price is actually more similar than they seem on the surface. One really important point that I'd like to make on the price is that when you're thinking about these two platforms as an agency owner or a freelancer, you want to also consider what is the cost going to be to you of managing and running and the longevity of these platforms. So I will say we've experienced in both WordPress, Elementor, and in Webflow, and the WordPress Elementor setups always require more work in the long run. And we have had sites on both platforms running for years, and it just takes more time and it takes more effort to keep a WordPress installation up to date and make sure that all the plugins that you're using are speaking to each other. If you've built something using advanced custom fields or some other plugins, they need to talk to Elementor, and you might have other plugins working in there in the mix as well, and it becomes very difficult to manage and keep that up to date. Whereas with Webflow, everything is there. They update the software on their end. You don't need to do anything. We've literally never had anything break on any of our Webflow sites, whereas we do have to do maintenance on our WordPress sites to keep them up to date. So that time that's costing you money, that's definitely worth considering when you think about the price as well. But hard to put a value on it and hard to factor it in. I do understand that. So when it comes to hosting, that's something that hasn't really changed. With WordPress and Elementor, you still need to first get yourself a hosting setup. You then need to set up a WordPress environment. In some cases, depending on your host, you'll need to install WordPress. Then you need to install Elementor Pro. And then a lot of the times as well, you have to then update WordPress because the one-click install doesn't use the latest version. There's this process you have to go through, and it doesn't really take that long, but it's still, every minute counts really, especially when you start to get really busy. You've got lots of stuff on. It's just another headache that you don't need. Whereas with Webflow, it's literally just one click. You click the button and you're in a new project ready to start. And what a lot of agency owners, including ourselves, what we do is we have a project that we can clone. So we have a project set up that has column setups. It's got the default styling, different heading styles, everything just kind of pre-set up that we just clone so that we have a base to start from. It's not designed, it's just that it has the structure there to work with. Something that goes hand in hand with the hosting is the security. There's really no contest here. Webflow is just leaps and bounds ahead of WordPress in terms of how secure it is. And that's down to, again, the plugins and WordPress being open source. There's lots of opportunities for vulnerabilities to be introduced, lots of potential ways in, and because so many sites are on WordPress, there are so many hackers targeting WordPress sites because it's the majority of sites on the internet, so that's what they go for. But Webflow also have a really robust security setup. They kind of detail that on their website. I won't go into the technical specifics of it right now, but it is a really, really secure platform. So another thing similarly related to the hosting is the speed. So the first thing to say in comparing the two is that the code that Webflow produces is much, much cleaner. And I'll talk a little bit about this later on as well, but it's just such a lightweight website that it's naturally going to load faster than something created with Elementor. Now, Elementor has improved. There's now options to disable scripts, so you don't have to load every script and slow down your website with all these extra scripts. There are also optimizations built into Elementor now, which have improved from previous versions, but I still find Elementor and WordPress sites, even on fast hosting, they still run slower than Webflow sites do, which are running on the AWS setup with a global content delivery network. One thing I will say is that because Webflow gives you so much granular control, it is possible to make expensive mistakes. And I don't mean expensive as in cost or time or money. I mean expensive as in processing power. If you're developing a collection list with CMS items in it, if you add too many div blocks in here and make it too complex, and you've got high-res images and lots of them, Webflow will allow you to display up to 100 of these items on a single page, and that can cause a massive DOM element size, and you'll get ranked negatively on page speed for that kind of thing. So it's got so much control that it allows you to make these kinds of mistakes, I feel. But again, these are mistakes you could make with Elementor. It's just easier to run into these kinds of issues because of how simple the setup is in Webflow. Okay, so the next thing is the design experience. This is probably the biggest difference between the two, I think, in terms of an agency owner's perspective. You have complete control with Webflow over every element. I don't know how many times with a Elementor site that we've been using some of the widgets, I'll call them, and they don't do exactly what we want them to do. They're just not quite right. The graphic design of them can't be customized quite enough to make them look exactly how we want them to look. And what ends up happening is we've created a mock-up that we've had approved by the client, and then we're sort of doing the best estimation, or like the closest thing we can get to the mock-up that isn't exactly like the mock-up, and it doesn't work the way we'd imagined in our heads. It just works the way Elementor have built it. We found ourselves in this position where we've bought multiple add-ons to Elementor that give you certain elements that are styled a particular way or allow you to style them differently and have different features. And really, it's not a great way to work. You're really at the mercy of what Elementor can provide you with, and you're not in complete control. Whereas with Webflow, you're building everything out from scratch. So yes, there's a steeper learning curve, but it's absolutely worth it if you're an agency owner to take the time to learn Webflow, because then you can create everything, you can style it and build it exactly how you want. Not only that, but you're learning how the building blocks of the web come together in a way that's actually relatable to a developer. So you're working in terms of div blocks, and you're applying CSS styles. You're just doing it using visual buttons rather than typing out the CSS yourself. So I went into more detail in the previous video, and I'll maybe show some of these slides here. Basically, Webflow allows you to create really clean code and a really clean layout with classes all named correctly, and you've got control over all of these things. Whereas Elementor is naming the classes for you and sticking big long ID numbers in there, and it just creates quite messy code. And I think they have tried to improve this, but it's still miles away from what Webflow is, because Webflow really is just a visual tool for creating code. So the code really is just as a developer would do it just about. So that is a really big difference between the two there. Ultimately, I think on the design point, it comes down to creative control. As an agency owner or a freelancer, you really want to have maximum creative control to deliver the vision you've had to your client. That's what I feel like Webflow gives us. And that's why I think Webflow is just far superior in that category particularly. So I wanted to talk about a couple of the pitfalls with both Webflow and with Elementor really quickly. So with Webflow, if you're creating a blog and you've got a rich text element within that blog, you're kind of limited to what you can create in there. You can't add block sections or elements that have unique styles applied to them. You really just have the options of like H1 to H6 paragraph elements and images, and you're very limited with what you can insert into a rich text block, which means you can't have a full width section in between your blog or in the middle of it without setting it up in a kind of inconvenient way. So WordPress gives you a better option there. On the Elementor side, I think one of the most difficult things is getting consistency across the site. So there are ways to set up default styling now, and they've updated that and added global styles. So they're definitely making lots of progress there, but it's still a long way away from having actual class names that control things and combo classes. It's not a great way to create a consistent experience on the website. In general, Elementor makes it harder to have a really nice, consistent web experience. So I've tried to keep the video fairly short and not ramble too much, because there really is so much to talk about, and there's so many more points of comparison beyond what I've talked about here. You can check out some of our other videos if you're interested in the transition from WordPress to Webflow. But yeah, that's been it for today. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this, and hope to see you in the next one.